The air in the sunroom that afternoon had the heavy, sweet scent of blooming jasmine, a smell that even years later now catches in my throat and makes my hands tremble. That was the day my mother-in-law, Evelyn, stood across from me, sipping her iced tea, and whispered a secret that felt less like a confession and more like a carefully aimed bullet. The child you call your daughter is not your own. I should start at the beginning. My name is Clara. I was 38 when this happened, happily married to my husband, Mark, and mother to a vibrant, imaginative 7-year-old girl named Lily. Our life in the suburbs was comfortable, quiet, the kind of life you build piece by piece, believing in the strength of the foundation. Mark and I had met later than most, in our late 20s. He was a kind, steady man, an architect with quiet hands and a reassuring voice. He was everything I hadn't known I was looking for, especially after a series of tumultuous relationships in my early 20s. I loved him for his stability, his genuine goodness, and the way he looked at me across a crowded room. The one shadow on our sunlit life was his mother, Evelyn. Evelyn was a woman built of polished steel and passive-aggressive suggestions. She didn't shout or storm. She used silence and a tone of pity that could curdle milk. She ran her household like a meticulously curated museum, and she regarded me, a woman who worked from home as an editor, whose hair was often messy, and whose house had the charming clutter of a life lived fully, as an unfortunate, but temporary, stain on her family's legacy. She never missed an opportunity to remind me how I wasn't quite enough. My cooking was too spicy, my garden was too wild, and my parenting was too lenient. But her greatest, most persistent source of veiled criticism was Lily. Lily was a miracle, born after 3 years of trying and one devastating miscarriage. She was all Mark and me, his broad smile, my intense, thoughtful eyes. She was the light of our home. Yet from the moment Lily was born, Evelyn treated her with a curious, cool distance. She rarely held her as an infant, and as a child her gifts were always too expensive, too complex, or entirely inappropriate. A grand piano when Lily just wanted crayons, a pearl necklace when she just wanted a soccer ball. I learned to manage Evelyn through distance and politeness. Mark, bless his heart, was a true mama's boy. Not in a malicious way, but in a conflict-avoidant one. He saw his mother as frail and easily hurt, a delicate creature whose subtle manipulations he could never perceive. If I complained, he'd sigh, "Oh, Clara, it's just mother. She doesn't mean anything by it." It was his blind spot, and over the years I let it become mine too, for the sake of peace. Life rolled on. The scent of coffee and burnt toast on a Tuesday morning, the crunch of Lily's sneakers on the gravel as she ran to the school bus, the comfortable weight of Mark's arm around me on the sofa after a long week. These were the things that made up my reality, a reality that, despite Evelyn's low hum of a critique, felt safe and true. But the subtle change started a few months before that jasmine-scented day. It wasn't anything loud. It was a slow tightening of the knot. Evelyn, usually content to keep me on the perimeter, began inviting herself over more frequently, on scheduled Sunday visits, on Tuesday afternoons, and even dropping by unannounced on a Saturday. She wouldn't call, appear, her hand already raising to knock as I looked through the peephole. She'd stand in the entryway, her perfectly pressed linen skirt rustling, and say, "I was just in the area, dear. No need to tidy up on my account, though I do wonder about that stain on the Persian rug." During these visits, she became hyper-focused on Lily. She'd watch her play, not with grandmotherly warmth, but with a forensic intensity. She'd ask her questions about her friends, her hobbies, and then unervingly about my past. "Lily, darling, has your mother ever mentioned living in New York?" she'd ask, tilting her head. "I hear it's quite the place for young, spirited women." I had lived in New York for 6 months right out of college, a time I rarely mentioned because it was chaotic and irrelevant, but Evelyn was pressing. I felt a chill run down my spine, a feeling that she was fishing, dragging a net through my past, looking for something to snag. Then came the conversation with Mark, which was the first real crack in my foundation. We were in the kitchen after a particularly strained dinner with Evelyn. She had spent the evening comparing Lily's slightly hooked nose to her side of the family, altogether omitting any resemblance to mine. "Did you notice Mother tonight?" I asked Mark, rinsing a plate. She was obsessing over Lily's nose again. "It's starting to feel calculated." Mark paused, his hands still in the soapy water. He didn't look at me. "She just misses having a baby in the house, Clara. It's hard for her. She had a difficult time with my father, you know." "It's not about missing a baby, Mark. It's about undermining me. It's about implying that Lily somehow doesn't belong," I said, my voice rising a notch. "It's been 7 years. Why is she suddenly interviewing our daughter about my history?" He pulled his hands out, drying them on a towel with unnecessary force. "Look, Mother asked me about something a few months ago. Something from a long time ago. I told her the truth and she's just processing it." I stopped. The sound of the running faucet suddenly felt deafening. The truth about what, Mark? He finally met my eyes and I saw a flicker of genuine distress, quickly masked by his usual calm. It's nothing, Clara. Just something about a brief fling you had before we met. She was worried you hadn't been completely honest with me, so I reassured her. I told her I knew everything. I told her there was nothing to worry about. My breath caught. I had told Mark about my past, of course, but the details were private and belonged only to us. The idea that he had openly discussed my history with his mother and then felt the need to reassure her was a profound invasion. But more than that, the sheer absurdity of Evelyn prying into a 10-year-old relationship to find fault with a 7-year-old child felt insane. I dismissed it as Evelyn's latest, most desperate maneuver to assert dominance, and Mark's tragic inability to set a boundary. I told myself, let it go, Clara. She's just an older woman terrified of losing her son. I chose to bury the clue, to ignore the tremor. And for a few more weeks our everyday life settled back in, smelling of coffee, toast, and the quiet, stubborn resilience of a woman refusing to fight a shadow. Until the day of the jasmine. I was finishing up a writing project when Evelyn arrived, as usual, unannounced. She stood in the sunroom, looking out at the yard where Lily was attempting to train the family dog, a happy golden retriever, in obedience. Lily's earnest voice carried faintly through the glass, bright and innocent. Evelyn sat down, not in her usual stiff upright posture, but slightly slumped, radiating manufactured exhaustion. She accepted the tea and then, without preamble, delivered her line, her eyes fixed on Lily, her voice a low, throaty whisper of fake concern. The child you call your daughter is not your own. The teacup in my hand didn't shatter, but the silence did. It was a silence filled only by the distant sounds of Lily's laughter and the sharp tick of the expensive grandfather clock in the hallway. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold, dizzying rush. What did you just say, Evelyn? My voice was low and steady, not a scream but a deep, dangerous current. She sighed, a dramatic flutter of the lungs. I know this is hard to hear, dear, but Mark and we have spoken. He confessed to me. He confided that you had a very intense relationship during your time in New York. You told him it was over before you met, but it wasn't, was it? The dates don't align, Claire. He admitted that Lily was conceived just before you two became serious. He's been carrying this burden alone, allowing you to perpetuate this lie. I felt a surge of pure white-hot rage, an emotion so intense it almost buckled my knees. This was not passive aggression. This was an attack. A malicious, calculated attempt to dismantle my life, not with subtle remarks about my housekeeping, but by destroying my entire identity as a wife and mother. Mark told you this? I asked, the words hollow. Mark told you I cheated on him and that our daughter is not his? She put a trembling hand to her heart, the picture of martyrdom. He couldn't stand the deceit any longer, Clara. He only told me because he wants to do the right thing, to protect his family name. He needs to know the truth. She paused, leaning forward conspiratorially. He suspects. He just needs a final answer. In that moment, I understood everything. I understood the bizarre questions about New York, the persistent staring at Lily, the frantic need to find a single flaw in my past. This was Evelyn's endgame. She hadn't accidentally discovered a secret. She had created one, twisting a harmless past relationship I had mentioned to Mark into a full-blown paternity crisis. She had weaponized Mark's fear of conflict, exploiting his vague answer. I told her I knew everything, to fabricate a confession. She wasn't just trying to make me feel inadequate. She was trying to force me out and replace me. I looked out at Lily, her hair the color of fresh straw, her face flushed with the simple joy of an afternoon sun. And in that moment, the anger crystallized into a resolve so cold and sharp it gave me clarity. I would not allow this woman to use my daughter's legitimacy as a pawn in her twisted family game. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a scrape that made Evelyn flinch. Get out of my house, Evelyn, I said, my voice quiet, terrifyingly steady. And before you go, let me tell you this. I am not running from this lie. You want the truth? You will get the truth, but you're going to get all of it. She blinked, momentarily stunned by my defiance. She had expected tears, denial, a hasty retreat. I walked to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and before she could even reach the doorway, I began to make calls. The first was to a highly recommended family law attorney. The second was to a certified DNA testing lab that performed court-admissible paternity tests. The clock had been ticking slowly for years, measuring Evelyn's spite. Now I was the one setting the pace. The afternoon unfolded in a strange, disorienting haze. After Evelyn's hasty, indignant departure, She'd muttered something about my lack of Christian charity. I stood in the center of the sunroom, tracing the lines of the antique tea service. My hands were shaking too hard to put the cups away. The immediate rush of adrenaline, the need to banish her, gave way to a cold, creeping doubt. Mark's words, "I told her I knew everything," looped in my head. He had confirmed that I told him about the brief relationship in New York. Yes. But had he said more? Had he given Evelyn any shred of a reason to twist that old truth into this monstrous new lie? Why hadn't he defended me instantly when she brought it up? His habitual silence, his tendency to placate his mother rather than protect his wife, suddenly felt like a fresh, profound betrayal. I watched Lily through the window. She was kneeling by the dog, trying to tie a bright pink ribbon around his ear. She was pure, uncomplicated joy. The idea that someone, especially Mark's mother, could deliberately cast a shadow of doubt over this child's very existence, over her right to be a secure member of this family, sickened me. I decided not to confront Mark immediately. I needed to move with surgical precision. If I came at him with just Evelyn's claim, he would, true to form, retreat into confusion, deny everything, and blame the tension on my overreaction. I needed facts, evidence, and an unassailable plan. My call to the family law attorney, Ms. Chin, was my first step into the cold reality of protecting myself. She listened with quiet, professional detachment. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, her voice crisp, "a claim of non-paternity, especially from an in-law, is rarely a legal issue unless it involves inheritance or child custody. However, the emotional damage and the risk that this lie will infect your child's life are very real. I recommend you secure proof immediately, not just for your husband but for your own peace of mind and for the record." She recommended a specific court-admissible DNA testing service capable of conducting a comprehensive analysis. I booked the appointment for the following Saturday morning. I felt a grim, almost manic control settling over me. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in justice, documented and irrefutable. When Mark came home that evening, the air was thick with the unsaid. He smelled of drafting paper and coffee. He kissed me, but his eyes were evasive. "Did Mother stop by?" he asked, not looking at me as he changed his shoes. "Yes," I said, putting my hand on the cool granite countertop to steady myself. "She did. She called me afterwards," he admitted, his voice low. "She said you were terribly upset, that you were being unreasonable about the past." "Mark," I began, using a quiet, measured tone that demanded attention, "your mother stood in our home and told me that she believes, based on something you allegedly confided in her, that Lily is not your daughter. She claimed I cheated on you before we were married and that the timeline doesn't match." Mark froze, his back to me. The silence stretched until I thought I might scream. When he finally turned, his face was pale, his eyes wide. "What?" he whispered. That's insane. I never said that. I would never." She must have completely misunderstood. "I only told her that you had a relationship in New York and that I fully trusted you. I told her the dates were fine, that everything was fine." His reaction was genuine fear. Not the guilt of a lying man, but the terror of a passive man who realized his negligence had been weaponized. "She didn't misunderstand, Mark," I said. "She deliberately manipulated your words to create chaos, and you allowed her enough access to our privacy to do it. But we can't just let her misunderstand this away. This isn't a comment on my cooking. This is an attack on our daughter's identity, and I am done letting your fear of conflict define my reality." I took a breath and delivered my demand clearly and calmly. "This Saturday we are going to a DNA lab. Both of us, you and me. We are going to get a court-admissible paternity test done with Lily. We will get the results, and then we will present the objective, undeniable truth to your mother, and to anyone else she has poisoned with this lie." He looked utterly shattered, leaning against the kitchen island, his strong hands trembling. "Claire, please, it's not necessary. I know Lily is my daughter. She looks just like my grandmother. Don't you see how she's trying to drive a wedge between us? Don't let her win. She's already won the first round by putting this thought into the world, Mark, by making you even think about denying me for a moment. And yes, I know Lily is your daughter, but this isn't about us knowing the truth. This is about proving the truth with legal authority so she can never use this weapon again. This is about protecting Lily's right to an unblemished, secure family identity. You will come with me, Mark, and if you refuse, then her lie becomes more believable than your denial." I watched him struggle, the fear of his mother battling the instinct to protect his wife and child. He looked away, then back at me, his eyes finally clearing. He saw the cold resolve on my face, the absolute certainty that I was leaving him no other choice. "Okay," he choked out, his voice thin with defeat and shame. "I'll do it, but why me? Why do I have to be tested?" "Because, Mark," I said, my voice softening just slightly, "if you hadn't betrayed my confidence to your mother, we wouldn't be here. You need to face the direct consequence of your passivity. And more importantly, the test will include me, the mother, proving that no swap or adoption happened. We present a united, irrefutable front. I'm not just clearing my name, I'm setting fire to her entire fabrication. The realization dawned on him. This was not a test of his paternity, it was the mechanism of my counterattack. The next few days were the longest and most emotionally isolating of my marriage. Mark and I maintained an uneasy truce, performing the motions of our routine life around the silent, ticking bomb of the upcoming DNA test. We cooked dinner, helped Lily with homework, and tucked her into bed, but we barely spoke. Every time I looked at Mark, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw the nervous little boy who valued his mother's opinion over his wife's dignity, and that wound was fresh and deep. The only way I could manage was by focusing on the mechanics of the plan. I spent hours speaking with Ms. Chin, preparing a binder of information. It included Lily's birth certificate, old photos tracing her uncanny resemblance to my side of the family, and, crucially, a detailed timeline of my relationship with Mark that proved definitively that my brief New York fling was ancient history before Mark and I even met. This wasn't about clearing my conscience for Mark. He now seemed genuinely remorseful and convinced of his error. It was about preparing for the public fallout Evelyn intended. Saturday morning arrived, gray and overcast. I drove Mark and Lily to the clinic. I had told Lily it was a special doctor's checkup to make sure she was growing up strong, and she, blissfully unaware, chattered about her new favorite cartoon. The clinic was sterile, quiet, and slightly intimidating. The technician, a professional woman with kind eyes, led us through the process. Mark had to sign waiver after waiver, acknowledging the legal implications of the test. I noted the tremor in his hand as he signed his name, a small, sad victory. The procedure itself was simple, a cheek swab for each of us, but the emotional weight was crushing. When the technician swabbed Lily's tiny, trusting cheek, I held her hand tightly. Mark stood stiffly to the side, looking utterly miserable. In that clinical room, reduced to a collection of genetic samples, the absurdity of Evelyn's malice became physically tangible. As we drove home, Mark finally broke the silence. "Clara, I am so sorry," he mumbled, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "I am sorry I let her manipulate me. I should have told her firmly that my trust in you was absolute. I was just so caught off guard by her concern about the family legacy that I confirmed what she wanted to hear." I looked out the window, watching the rain start to fall. "You confirmed her suspicions, Mark. You gave her the tool to try and destroy my life and question our daughter. You have always been able to tolerate her subtle cruelty because it wasn't aimed at you. This time it hit your daughter and me. It stops now." I told him the next phase of the plan. The results would be delivered to me and Miss Chin directly in 3 days. Once we had the official document, we would call an emergency family meeting. "We are not doing this privately, Mark," I insisted. "Evelyn has been sowing discord quietly for years. We are going to expose her publicly. I want your sister, Mark's cousin, and your Uncle George there. The people who value truth and who have been subjected to her passive manipulation for too long. They need to hear the truth from us with the paperwork in hand, before Evelyn gets a chance to spin this any further." Mark was terrified. "Clara, you know how she is. She'll collapse. She'll play the victim. It will ruin the family." "No, Mark. She will play the victim, yes, but we are going to let her. This isn't about destroying her. It's about inoculating the rest of the family against her poison. And if the truth ruins the family, then that family was already rotten at the core." The results arrived precisely on time Tuesday morning. A sleek, official-looking document in a large brown envelope arrived via courier. I sat at my kitchen table, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I opened the envelope. Inside, on expensive, crisp paper, was the result, notarized and stamped. Child, Lily Peterson. Maternal parent, Clara Peterson. Paternal parent, Mark Peterson. Probability of paternity/maternity, 99.9999%. A massive physical wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't the relief of finding out the truth, I never doubted it, but the relief of holding the weapon that would neutralize Evelyn forever. I felt the powerful, dignified surge of a woman who had been dragged into a fight she didn't start, but one she was absolutely prepared to finish. I called Mark at his office, not to celebrate but to command. "The results are here. As expected, 99.9999%. Mark, you will call Evelyn. You will call your sister, Sarah, and the others. Tell them there is an urgent family matter regarding Lily that needs immediate discussion this Thursday evening at our house. Do not give any details. Just tell them to be here." Mark hesitated, but I cut him off. "Do it, Mark. Don't call me back until it's done." He made the calls. Later, he told me Evelyn had been triumphant on the phone. She said she was so relieved. I was finally taking responsibility for the situation. She said she couldn't wait to discuss how to manage the optics for Lily. She thought she was coming to discuss the cover-up of a cheating wife. She thought she was coming to celebrate her victory. She had no idea she was walking straight into a legal trap set by a wife she had gravely underestimated. I was ready. The family meeting was set for Thursday at 7 p.m. I had spent the day cleaning the dining room table, not obsessively but deliberately and calmly. I polished the wood until it gleamed, reflecting the single large bowl of white hydrangeas I had placed in the center. I needed the room to be orderly, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos I knew was coming. Order was my shield. At 6:30 p.m., Mark arrived home looking like a man marching to his own execution. He paced the kitchen, unable to sit. "She's coming with an agenda, Clara," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the front door. "She called Uncle George and told him it's about a delicate misunderstanding that she intends to resolve gracefully. She's already building her narrative of martyrdom." "Let her," I said, laying the certified DNA results on the polished table, centered perfectly beneath the hydrangeas. The paper was stark white against the dark wood. "The truth doesn't need a narrative, Mark. It only needs to be presented." The first to arrive were Mark's sister, Sarah, and her husband, Ken. Sarah was always the sympathetic, if timid, in-law, often caught in the crossfire of Evelyn's drama. She looked pale and worried. "Mark, what is going on?" Sarah asked immediately, hugging me tightly. "Mother was so cryptic. She said something about Clara needing to own up to things. I told her she needed to drop it." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "But your mother is mistaken. Tonight we clear up everything for good." Uncle George, Mark's father's older brother, arrived next. He was a stern, sensible man, the patriarch of the larger family who had always subtly disliked Evelyn's theatricality. He sat down heavily at the table, his eyes fixed on the mysterious document. Finally, at 7:05 p.m., Evelyn swept in, followed by a slightly awkward cousin, Eleanor. Evelyn wore an expression of serene, wounded nobility, the kind of look she saved for funerals and minor inconveniences. She immediately spotted the assembled family and the mood. "Well, this is unnecessary fanfare, isn't it?" she announced, shedding her cashmere shawl. She didn't look at me but addressed Mark. "Mark, darling, I came here tonight to help you manage this delicate situation. Clara, I do hope you've accepted that humility is the first step toward reconciliation." She then spotted the document on the table. Her eyes narrowed, but she dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "Before we proceed with the necessary steps to secure Lily's future, and naturally your legacy, Mark, I want to apologize to the family for the need for this secrecy. But I could not stand by and watch my son carry this pain alone. Clara, my dear, it's not too late to tell your side of the story, though the timeline, as Mark and I discussed, is quite damning." I stood at the head of the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even smile. I let the silence hang, heavy and expectant. "Evelyn," I began, my voice clear and steady, "there is nothing to reconcile and there is no need for humility on my part. I called this meeting because you came into my house and told a malicious, calculated lie about my daughter's parentage, based on a deliberate distortion of a private conversation with my husband. That lie ends now," she gasped, immediately launching into her defensive script. "Clara, shame on you, attacking me in front of the whole family after I tried to help my son." "Silence, Evelyn." I cut across her, something I had never dared to do. My tone was so decisive, so foreign to her experience of me, that she actually stopped speaking mid-sentence. I picked up the document and held it aloft. "You claimed Mark confessed that Lily was the result of infidelity and that the child was not his. You claimed I was lying about the timeline of our relationship. You claimed you were protecting your son's legacy." I slid the paper across the polished wood to Uncle George. "This is a certified, court-admissible DNA paternity report. It was conducted 4 days ago. Mark, Lily, and I all submitted samples. Please, Uncle George, read the conclusion aloud for everyone." Evelyn went rigid. Her eyes flew from the document to Mark, who was standing beside me, shoulders slumped, unwilling to meet her gaze. She knew in that instant she had lost control of the narrative. Uncle George put on his reading glasses, his brow furrowed. The sound of him unfolding the paper was loud in the room. He read the final lines slowly, deliberately, his voice resonating with authority. "Conclusion. The probability of paternity for Mark Peterson and maternity for Clara Peterson is 99.9999%. He set the document down, his eyes hard as flint as he looked at Evelyn. "Mark is the father. Clara is the mother. This child is theirs. Undeniably. Evelyn's composure finally shattered. She didn't cry or scream. She launched into a frantic, desperate justification. "This is not what Mark told me. He told me he was concerned. He said the dates were close. He was too much of a gentleman to admit the truth. You must have forged this, Clara. Or Mark. You must have swapped the samples to protect her reputation." I walked over to her side of the table. "Evelyn, you tried to destroy my marriage and my daughter's security based on a lie you created out of passive aggression and jealousy. Mark did not confess anything. He confirmed my timeline, which you twisted. And this document is legally binding. It is the truth. And now the whole family knows what you are capable of." I then turned to Mark, pulling his attention away from his mother and forcing him to face me. "Mark, look at me. You allowed your mother's poison into our lives. Now you must choose her manipulation or the future of your wife and your undeniably real daughter." He looked at his mother, then at the document, then back at me. I saw the struggle end. His passivity finally broke. "Mother," he said, his voice raw with a sudden, painful clarity. "I confirmed nothing but my wife's honesty. You lied. You have used your own grandson to destroy my marriage. You are not welcome in this house ever again. We are done." The consequence was immediate, painful, and absolute. Evelyn didn't collapse as Mark had feared. She did something far more chilling. She launched herself not into tears, but into a state of frozen, aristocratic fury. Her face, usually so mobile in its attempts at calculated sorrow, became smooth and hard as marble. "You will regret this, Mark," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room like shattered glass. "You chose this low-class opportunist over your own mother. You have disgraced your father's memory for a woman who clearly manipulated you." She attempted to gather sympathy from the others. She looked at Sarah, her voice regaining a tremor. "Sarah, darling, speak to your brother. Tell him he's making a terrible mistake." But Sarah, who had spent decades under her mother's thumb, looked at the undeniable document, looked at the pain etched on Mark's face, and finally looked at me, the woman whose entire existence had been targeted. Sarah shook her head slowly. "You went too far, Mother," Sarah said, her own voice surprisingly firm. "This wasn't about Mark's legacy. This was about trying to break them." Evelyn, sensing the complete loss of control, turned her wrath entirely on me. "You think this paper saves you, Clara? You think this piece of scientific trivia means anything? You are a scheming, vengeful woman. You engineered this entire display to humiliate me." "I engineered the truth, Evelyn," I corrected her calmly. "You engineered the lie. You attempted to use the most vulnerable thing in our lives, our daughter's legitimacy, to drive a wedge between Mark and me. I did not want this fight, but you brought it to my front door. My only action was to demand the truth legally and publicly, because you left me no private, dignified choice." I didn't wait for her next verbal assault. I walked to the door, opened it wide, and gestured out into the cool evening air. "This meeting is adjourned," I announced. "Mark has made his choice. The truth is now clear to everyone. Evelyn, you need to leave. And let me be clear. This is not a temporary cooling off. You are no longer welcome in our home. You will not have contact with Lily. If you attempt to contact my daughter or slander us further, my lawyer, Ms. Chin, is fully prepared to file a restraining order and a cease and desist order for defamation. This document is proof of your malicious intent." It was the sight of Mark, standing resolute and pale behind me, that finally made her retreat. She picked up her shawl, her movements stiff and jerky. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She swept out the door, the heavy click of the latch sounding like the final closing of a very long chapter. Uncle George was the first to speak after the door closed. He walked over to the table, picked up the DNA report, and folded it neatly. "I am deeply sorry, Clara," he said, handing the paper to Mark. "This behavior is inexcusable. You handled this with grace and courage. We all should have stood up to her years ago." He apologized to Mark as well, acknowledging the pressure he'd been under. Sarah, tearful now, hugged me again. "Thank you, Clara. You gave me the courage to see her clearly. She always did this. She used other people's pain to get what she wanted." The consequence was a quiet, profound, and immediate realignment of the family. The good people, Sarah, Ken, Uncle George, were shocked, but their respect for me grew exponentially. They were angry at Evelyn, not at me. The poison was quarantined, but the immediate aftermath that evening was just Mark and me, standing in the silence of the dining room. The truth was out, the in-laws were gone, but the marriage was bruised and bleeding. "She's gone," Mark murmured, running a shaky hand through his hair. I can't believe I spoke to her like that. I mean it, Claire. I won't let her back in. I know you mean it, Mark, I replied, but I didn't rush to embrace him. I needed him to understand the depth of his failure. But you still owe me and Lily more than just a firm line with your mother. He gave her the first tool. I had to go to a sterile clinic with our 7-year-old daughter to undo a lie you should have squashed instantly. We spent the next several days in a careful, challenging emotional landscape. The removal of Evelyn was like the amputation of a diseased limb, painful but necessary for survival. But the emotional scar in our marriage remained. Mark had protected his mother's feelings more than my reputation. We needed more than a DNA test to heal that breach. We needed a new foundation built on absolute protective trust. My action, the demand for a public certified test for all three of us, was the necessary and non-negotiable step to reclaim our family's dignity. Now, the more complex work of rebuilding our intimate trust began. The quiet that settled over our house after Evelyn's expulsion wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. It was the heavy silence that follows a significant collision. Lily noticed it immediately. She was still too young to understand the legal language of paternity reports, but she was keenly attuned to the emotional weather in our home. "Mommy, why is Daddy so quiet?" she asked one afternoon while we were baking cookies. I was rolling the dough too hard, my jaw tight. "Daddy is just very stressed about work, sweetie," I replied, the standard lie we use to shield children from adult wounds. "And why hasn't Grandma Evelyn called me?" "She usually calls to tell me my clothes are the wrong color," Lily said, only half jokingly. I knelt and pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of flower and vanilla on her hair. "Grandma Evelyn is taking a long break, sweetheart. Sometimes families need a break to be healthy. But what you need to know, absolutely and forever, is that you are loved. You are ours. You are Mark's daughter and my daughter. And you belong right here with us, safely." That night, after Lily was asleep, Mark and I sat in the living room, a space that felt too large for the two of us. I broke the silence. "Mark, the DNA test cleared my name and sealed your mother out, but it didn't fix the hole you created in our trust," I said, looking at him across the coffee table. "You have to understand the difference between knowing I didn't cheat and defending my honor. When she made that monstrous accusation, you didn't tell her to leave. You confirmed you had discussed my past, lending weight to her fiction." He looked down at his hands, twisting his wedding ring. "I was a coward, Clara. I was terrified of being the source of conflict, so I let her be the source of chaos. I let the fear of disappointing my mother override my duty to protect my wife and child. That night, when she told me the lie, I thought for a split second, what if? And that split second is what I'm most ashamed of. That she could plant that doubt, and that I didn't immediately crush it." His confession wasn't defensive. It was genuinely reflective. It was the first sign that he was finally shedding the skin of the passive mama's boy. "We are starting over, Mark," I told him, "but it has to be on my terms because you proved you couldn't enforce the boundaries. From now on, you will not have any private contact with your mother. No phone calls, no emails, no gifts. You will refer all communication regarding Lily or the family to Ms. Chin, my lawyer, and I will be the only one to approve any future contact, which for the record I do not foresee happening. You have to actively choose us over the idea of a perfect family piece she always represented." He met my eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. "I understand. I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." She will not hear from me again. The weeks that followed were strange. We began mandatory couples counseling, not to save a failing marriage, but to rewire a fundamentally damaged one. Mark had to learn how to identify his mother's manipulation tactics and, more importantly, how to use his own voice. I had to learn how to forgive the cowardice and differentiate it from the malice of infidelity. The public consequence continued to unfold outside our bubble. Sarah called me regularly. She reported that Evelyn was playing the victim furiously to the broader family, claiming I was unstable and had fabricated the entire test to frame her. But the DNA report, officially stamped and notarized, was an unassailable document. When Evelyn tried to use her usual passive-aggressive pity tone with Uncle George, he sent her a copy of the report, stapled to a terse letter from Ms. Chin confirming Mark had ceased all contact. The social fallout was swift and final. Evelyn's circle of influence, which thrived on gossip and suspicion, was suddenly confronted with a truth that contradicted her own victimhood. They didn't sympathize, they retreated. They couldn't afford to be associated with someone who had been proven to lie so maliciously about a child. The grand, polished steel woman who demanded perfection and obedience was suddenly alone, isolated by her own weapon, the truth I had forced into the light. Her motivation, I realized, was never about Lily's parentage. It was about the crushing realization that she was losing her son, and she used the darkest, most plausible lie she could invent to break his attachment to me. But she didn't just break me, she galvanized me. The actual, deep healing didn't happen in the lawyer's office or the cold, sterile lab. It happened in the small, unassuming moments that followed, when Mark and I had to learn to be a couple again, stripped of the buffer and the constant pressure of external critique. The first turning point came 6 weeks after the confrontation. We were helping Lily with a large, complicated jigsaw puzzle on the living room rug. She got stuck on a corner piece and, in a moment of frustration, threw it across the room. "It doesn't fit. It never fits," she cried, her little face scrunched up with anger. Mark, instead of his usual parental instinct to calm or distract, stopped and looked at the puzzle. He picked up a piece that seemed entirely wrong, a piece of sky where there should have been a roofline, and held it up. "It looks wrong, doesn't it?" he said to Lily. "It looks like it belongs somewhere else." But sometimes, when you're building something important, you realize that the piece you thought belonged in the sky was actually the missing link for the foundation just turned sideways. It was a clumsy analogy, but it spoke volumes to me. Mark was talking about his own position in the family and his role in the preceding chaos. He was admitting that his past attempts to force a false piece, the sky piece, had nearly shattered our foundation. Later that evening, after Lily was asleep, I found Mark sitting in the dining room, staring at the polished wood table where the confrontation had taken place. He was holding the DNA report. "I called Miss Chin today," he said quietly without looking up. "I asked her what my legal rights are to permanently bar my mother from our lives, even after I die." She explained how to adjust our estate planning to explicitly exclude my mother from any contact or future guardianship of Lily. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. This was the moment I realized he wasn't just performing obedience. He was taking genuine, painful action. He was actively prioritizing our security over the last remnants of his lifelong filial duty. "Mark, you don't have to cut her off forever," I said, my voice softer than it had been in months. "But I need to know you are choosing us, unequivocally." He put down the document and finally looked up at me. "I don't have a choice, Clara." She forced the choice. The moment she targeted Lily, she became a threat, not a mother. "My job is to protect my child and my wife." My mother failed to see that our marriage was not a game she could win. She forgot that our love was built on honesty, not just a shared surname. And my love for Lily, that's primal. When she put that shadow over our daughter, she lost me. That was the turning point in our marriage. Not the day of the test, but the day he finally articulated the moral lesson he'd learned. True love demands protection, not just passive endurance. We began to build our new life, a life blessedly free of the low-humming anxiety that Evelyn had continuously injected. The absence of her criticism felt like sunlight pouring into a room that had been perpetually shaded. We started new traditions focusing solely on the three of us. We planted a small maple tree in the backyard, a symbolic act of setting down new healthy roots, entirely separate from the brittle, manipulative roots of his family of origin. Lily flourished. The strange, quiet confusion she'd felt after the meeting slowly evaporated. She saw her parents united, her father suddenly more present and verbally appreciative of her mother. She heard the words of love and security spoken without the subtle caveat of a watchful grandmother's judgment. The house, once a comfortable refuge, became a true sanctuary. It was no longer a stage for my mother-in-law's drama, but a warm, safe container for our growth. I learned that redemption is rarely a grand, tearful moment. For Mark, it was the small, consistent actions of showing up, setting boundaries, and speaking the truth even when it hurt. For me, it was the hard-won dignity of knowing I had faced a callous injustice with courage, refusing to let my enemy define the battlefield or the weapon. I chose the most potent weapon of all, undeniable, documented truth. It has been 4 years since that jasmine-scented afternoon, 4 years since I held that piece of paper, that indisputable proof, in my hand. The quiet has long since stopped being hollow. It has become the deep, satisfying piece of a home that knows its own truth. Mark and I found our way back, but not by forgetting. We found our way back by talking, by establishing a zero-tolerance policy for manipulation, and by understanding that love isn't just a feeling, it's a daily act of protection. Mark learned to be a husband and a father first before he was a son, and in doing so he became the strong, good man I always knew he was. Our marriage is stronger today because it survived Evelyn's cruelest attack, emerging not unscathed but steel-forged. Lily, our beautiful, creative daughter, is now 11. She is still oblivious to the paternity accusation, and she always will be. That was the most essential act of protection. The truth we demanded was for the adults, for the record, and for the necessary moral accounting. She knows she is deeply, fundamentally loved by her mother and her father, in a home that is secure and quiet. Evelyn, as expected, faded. Without a narrative to control and without an audience willing to tolerate her documented lies, she became a footnote. She tried to reach out once through a cousin, claiming she was ill and wanted to see Lily. I had Mischan responded with the only document that mattered, the cease and desist order. Mark supported me completely. There was no hesitation. The lesson I carry is this: when someone tries to poison your life with a calculated lie, you do not meet them with quiet dignity. You meet them with unassailable truth. You don't retreat. You bring the fight onto objective ground and force the exposure. Dignity isn't found in silence, but in decisive action taken to protect the innocent. I look at that little maple tree we planted. It's tall now, its leaves catching the sunlight, giving shade to Lily's favorite spot in the yard. It grew not despite the storm, but because of the deep, necessary cuts we made to clear the way for its growth. Would you have handled it the same way? Would you have demanded a public, undeniable test to silence the whispers once and for all? I know the story is long, but these things, these betrayals that redefine our lives, they take time to tell and even longer to truly heal. Thank you as always for listening to my story. Please like, share, and subscribe if you felt a connection to my journey. And let me know in the comments, how do you rebuild trust after such a devastating betrayal of confidence?